You've probably heard about how strong Lauma is already, but I'm going to show you calcs for even more teams that no one else is talking about that will convince you Lauma is straight up one of the best characters in the game, even more busted than you think. I put a ton of time and effort into these calcs and rotations for this video, so if you find it helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you are planning to pull a Lauma or any current or upcoming characters, and you want to save money on your Genesis crystals, check out our sponsor, Loot Bar. Loot Bar is a very safe and reliable top-up site that allows you to purchase Genesis crystals at up to 25% discount compared to the in-game prices. Your data is completely safe during the transaction. All you need to provide is your in-game user ID number, and when purchasing through Loot Bar, you'll even receive points that you can use to redeem rewards such as a Welcome Moon or cash coupons. Loot Bar is widely used by even some of your favorite large creators such as Jello Impact, and has positive reviews from over 30,000 users. So go ahead and click the link in the description to get started. New users will get 25% off their first purchase. Thank you, Loot Bar. Now back to the video. Alright, so as a dedicated bloom reaction buffer, it's only natural that Lauma is fantastic in Hyper Bloom and Quick Bloom teams, and we have a lot of those. Starting with the Dendro DPS, since there's only two of them, we have Tighnari. His current strongest team should be with Furina, Nahida, and Kuki, doing 15-second rotations. Furina's skill cooldown is 20 seconds, but it lasts 30 seconds, so you can just cast it every other rotation and still get full uptime. With Lauma, you'll use her in place of Nahida and then Cyno in place of Furina. Both Cyno and Lauma have cooldowns no longer than 15 seconds, so they fit well into the rotation. But although Cyno has relatively slow hydro application, that can actually be pretty good for Dendro DPS, because she'll seldom, if ever, remove Quicken. You'll still get around 11 or so Hyper Blooms, assuming Cyno is C2. By including Lauma and Cyno, you'll also be at max Moonsign and able to use Tighnari on the new DPS set, plus someone else on the support set. Between that set and Cyno C1, Tighnari will have an extra 200 Elemental Mastery and Kuki an extra 120. Overall, this is an upgrade. It's not a huge upgrade, but we can take it further beyond. Tighnari is somewhat known for being playable without any form of sustain, since a lot of the time in his rotations is spent quick swapping through burst iframes. If you are comfortable playing him this way, then Yai Miko can be used instead of Kuki. What's really cool about using Yai here is the new free event weapon next patch, Etherlight Spindle, basically just gives you 405 Elemental Mastery. So this plus Gilded Dreams let her reach over 1000 Elemental Mastery for excellent Hyper Bloom damage similar to Kuki's, while still being on an Electro Goblet and Crick Circlet. Unlike Kuki, Yai will also be doing good damage from her skill and burst at the same time. The caveat is Yai's skill doesn't have much AoE, so she may miss out on some Hyper Blooms, and we'll need to see in post-release how well this plays out. But assuming she hits 9 Hyper Blooms per rotation, it should be an upgrade over Kuki, although not a huge difference. Now, Alhaitham is an interesting situation. In my Nefa pre-release video, I suggested his new best team may be double Electro with Yelan, Oraran, and Nefa. Quick update on that, you need to use Zinc Show and not Yelan and do a 2 mirror combo on Alhaitham instead of 3 for that team. Otherwise, there's just too much Dendro for a Nefa. Double Electro is indeed a strong team for Alhaitham now, thanks to how much sub DPS he's getting from Nefa and Oraran there. However, my friend and fellow theory crafter Butterfur is a dedicated Alhaitham main and has discovered a more optimal rotation for Alhaitham's team with Furina, Kuki, and Nahida. The rotation he came up with is basically, instead of doing a loopable 30-second rotation, instead do the rotations listed here, where the first rotation is around 25 seconds, second is about 20, then the third is that first 25-second or so rotation again. Doing this drastically reduced Alhaitham's total rotation time and tremendously increased the team DPS to a bit over 100,000, which is pretty insane to think he was capable of these 5.x levels of DPS all the way back in Fontaine and we just didn't know. That puts his classic team pretty much equal to double Electro, but what about Lauma? What we've come up with for Lauma for now is looping around a 26-second rotation with Cyno and Kuki. Cyno should be a good Hydro option like with Tighnari. Her rate of Hydro, she should remove basically no spreads at all while still giving around 11 to 12 Hyper Blooms and being from Not Cry to enable the use of the sets. Based on my math, this is a bit higher than double Electro and the classic team. If you already have a Constellated Nahida for Alhaitham's current team though, I would just stick with that since Lauma's vertical scaling does not scale past Nahida's. Let's now look at the Electro DPS because there's quite a lot going on here. Cyno just got a very nice buff from Nefa, but he still really needs a better Dendro than Nahida and Baizu to work with. Lauma's buffing and personal damage, along with her making the team have 2 Not Cry characters to use the new sets, should make her a pretty huge upgrade. You'll want to use Zinc Show as the Hydro since there's no healer for Farina, and Zinc Show's duration and rate of Hydro results in far more Hyper Blooms than Yelan. I've playtested what the reaction count should look like using Baizu as a placeholder for Lauma, since they both apply every 2 seconds, and with Baizu I was getting around 18 effective Hyper Blooms. That may sound too high considering Baizu only applies Dendro about 8 total times, but it's possible to get up to 3 Hyper Blooms per Dendro application. This is because if you apply Dendro onto an electro-charged aura, you not only trigger Bloom, but also quicken at the same time, meaning the enemy now has a Dendro aura. Then it takes 2 instances of Hydro to remove that Dendro aura, so that's 2 more Blooms. Xingqiu is pretty much the only Hydro with fast enough application to take advantage of this. You will get less aggravates with him than other Hydros, but those Hyper Blooms are buffed by Lauma, so that's what we want. But as you can see from the numbers, if the assumptions I've made for the calc play out in practice, this team is pretty much every Cyno main's wet dream, bringing him unbelievably close to the DPS levels of Clorinde and Veressa. Note that with the rotation here, I have Cyno swapping off after his second Incir rather than the third. I found this to be better since Lauma only lasts 15 seconds. It's ideal to rotate around having her up for as much of the rotation as possible. Cyno isn't the only Electro character able to take advantage of Lauma in Zinc Show core this way though. Sethos is basically a 4-star ranged Cyno with less damage but also less fill time, so this results in him having an insanely strong team for a 4-star DPS. He can even provide a team-wide 80 elemental mastery buff at C4, though I didn't account for his C4 in my calc since it doesn't work in single target. Raiden should be able to use this support trio far better than I think anyone would have ever expected. Her kit is actually legitimately good use non-copium here, as Nefer and Lauma both benefit greatly from not needing to build any energy recharge. So this is seeming to be an absolutely massive upgrade to Raiden, actually giving her a team that meets modern day DPS standards, even if it is a bit of a wheelchair. For Clorinde, she heals herself, so I tried using Farina as the Hydro. It was better than Xingqiu, and Clorinde is a good DPS and this is a good team core, so the team is strong by default, but Clorinde herself doesn't have any real synergy for Quick Bloom, so it's not as good as her Overload team for her, but it can be good to have in your arsenal as a Clorinde main to deal with enemies that would incentivize the use of Hyper Bloom or lunar-charged, such as the Cactus. And lastly for Electro we have Flins. He's a modern day EM scaling Electro DPS, so it kinda goes without saying he'd be the best one here. This is a very strong team, but there's not much reason to use Flins here when he has a stronger team that doesn't need you to pull Lauma. As mentioned with Clorinde, it can still be nice to have this in your arsenal though, since I'm pretty sure there's a new boss in 6.0 that you need to use Bloom against. Let's now talk about Hydro, starting with Nilou. I am by no means an expert on Nilou theory crafting, so there could very well be a more optimal team or rotation to use, and my Bloom counts could be off, but based off what I've looked into, the ideal team should be with Kokomi and Nahida, using Kokomi on the field for healing plus Bloom ownership. I have seen concerns with whether or not Kokomi will be enough healing for all the self-damage you'll be taking, but fortunately, even if you build her on a pure healing build, Kokomi will still reach very high EM and Bloom damage bonus here. The new craftable gives 220 EM plus 96 Bloom damage bonus, and there's Dendro Resonance, Nahida, and Nilou all providing plenty of EM as well, and not to mention Nilou's massive Bloom damage bonus buff, and Lauma's buffing as well. Lauma can even provide an additional 120 Bloom damage bonus if you have her signature weapon. So the Blooms can do between 55 to 110,000 damage depending on if they crit or not, even without using any EM main stats. This is pretty absurd and results in a Nilou team with great single target while still having her insane AoE scaling. I also looked into using Cyno as the second Hydro when going double Not Cry, but the Blooms losing the ability to crit is a massive loss since they are most of the team's damage, plus having to use Baizu instead of Nahida for healing doesn't help either. So Kokomi plus Nahida should definitely be the way to go, though keep in mind things may change once we have Nefer. Now Neuvillette, I mentioned in my first impressions video that I expect Lauma and Nefer Farina to be his new strongest team, and that does indeed seem to be the case. This is a double Hydro team, so you'll be able to get great uptime on lunar-charged thunderclouds for Nefer, and she'll simultaneously trigger the Hyper Blooms buffed by Lauma for tremendous total damage output, similar to Neuvillette's own damage. Neuvillette and Lauma's applications are also both a huge AoE, so the Hyper Bloom counts will scale very well to AoE content. And Lauma can cast her hold skill twice for full uptime and great damage throughout the rotation. Also note that Farina should ideally be using the new Not-Cry support set for 120 team-wide elemental mastery and Tuner lunar reaction damage bonus, as these buffs outweigh having Golden Troop for her own damage, but it's not worth putting Neuvillette on the new DPS set over Hunter. But overall, Neuvillette does indeed have a new best team, and this actually pushes him above most of the natlan DPS, back into being one of the top 5 highest DPS characters in the game, at least for now. I also looked into using her in classic double Hydro Hyperbloom with Yelan and either Farina and Kuki, or Xingqiu and Nefa. This does look quite strong, with Xingqiu and Nefa being the way to go. You could also use Ayato instead of Xingqiu and on-field him. He's not really adding much other than being AoE, but even still, this seems to be roughly equal in strength to his Escoffier team, and Nefa and Lauma together is just that strong. And lastly, Lauma does also buff Burgeon, but Burgeon is just not a good reaction due to having anti-synergy with Burning compared to the fantastic synergy with Electro-Charged has for Hyperbloom. But I did still want to give Burgeon a fair chance, so I calculated a Hu Tao Burgeon team with Yelan, Cyno, and Lauma, the idea being that Burgeon can give Hu Tao some AoE. I was generous in my calc here and assumed that you don't lose any vapes on Hu Tao at all, and the self-damage from Burgeon has her under 50% HP all the time. Should these favorable assumptions play out, this is a pretty competent team with her Farina Yelan Shalonin team, but her new Overvape team with Anefa is just a lot stronger. That team also has AoE while having shielding, so there's no reason to use this over that. Fortune just sucks. That covers all the teams I looked into for now. There should definitely be a few more like Duri and maybe even Kave that I haven't looked into. For those I would need to either see early access rotation footage or test them in game myself before calculating them. So with the teams covered, let's take a look at building Lauma, starting with her energy. Her energy requirements can actually be pretty high. Solo Dendro, she can need anywhere from 150 to 210% ER depending on the rotation length, if she does 2 skills or not, and so on. Even in double Dendro, it can be anywhere from 120 to 195% depending on rotation length, if you're able to use her skill twice, if you're trying to use a burst twice, and so on and so forth. So with these energy requirements in mind, for her artifact main stats, you'll usually want an ER Sans. Goblet is always going to be EM, then Circlet will usually be EM as well, but in teams where her whole E is doing a good portion of the team's damage, a crit Circlet can be good, but shouldn't be much different than EM. And then substats, prioritize energy recharge until you have enough in your team, then EM and crit. Artifact sets, the best one for Lauma will depend heavily on the team and rotation. Deep Roots is a necessary set in all of our teams, and she should use it if no one else is free to, but if somebody else already has Deep Roots, then the Not-Card support set is great, assuming there are 2 Not-Card characters on the team. In a team such as Nilou Bloom, where Lauma's hold skill is a large portion of the damage, it can even be worth it to use her on the new DPS set to maximize that damage. So choose between these 3 sets depending on what makes the most sense for your team. Weapons, Lauma's signature will naturally be her best, providing nearly 400 elemental mastery and pretty large buffs to both Bloom, Hyperbloom, and Lunar Bloom damage bonus. But if you aren't pulling for it, don't worry, she has fantastic free-to-play weapons. As mentioned, the new event weapon Etherlight Spindle provides a goofy 405 elemental mastery as a free 4-star. If you don't have Lauma's signature, I'd suggest just always having her on this unless there's someone else on your team that needs it more, like Yai Miko. In which case, the craftable weapon Black Marrow Lantern is also great as it gives a strong 220 EM plus 48% Lunar Bloom damage bonus. Fruit of Fulfillment is also a great choice as it provides both energy recharge and elemental mastery at the same time. Those are pretty much the only weapons I'd ever bother using on Lauma. The free weapons for her are just so good, there's no real reason to use anything else unless it's her signature. You can expect the upgrade from her signature to be around 3 to 8% with the higher end being Nilou teams, so I'd really just keep her on a free weapon and pull something else if you want to upgrade your team. Lastly, let's briefly talk about the Constellations. The only constellation I'd really ever recommend pulling on Lauma is C1. This constellation is quite interesting as it does not directly increase your damage at all. Instead, it turns Lauma into a single target healer, providing a pretty good amount of healing every 2 seconds. Depending on the exact team and builds, you can expect these heals to range between 7 to 8,000, which is fantastic and more than enough sustain for most content. So the value of this constellation will depend on how much you can improve your team by replacing your current sustain unit with someone more offensive. To give a few examples, Nilou may be able to replace Kokomi with Xingqiu, getting way more blooms off his insane Hydro application. That should have a great damage increase. Tighnari, you could use Yai instead of Kuki and still have sustain, but even better, you could also then replace Cyno with Farina for much more damage. Cyno, you'd replace Xingqiu with Farina, you'll get less Hyperblooms, but everything else that Farina does should more than compensate, especially if you have her Constellations. The same should apply to the other Electro DPS like Raiden and Sethos. Switch from Xingqiu to Farina if you get C1 Lauma. So in short, despite not directly increasing your damage, this can be an extremely powerful constellation with excellent value. If you're wondering why I don't recommend Lauma C2, this constellation sounds more powerful than it really is. It doubles the size of her burst buff basically, and even includes an extra 40% Lunar Bloom damage bonus on top if you have two Knockout characters. As nice as that sounds, the team increase only ranges from about 5 to 11% with Nilou team benefiting the most. It's not bad, just there's more than likely something better you could have spent your Primo Gems on. And that's just about everything, so what's the verdict on Lauma? In my first impressions video, I said that I expect her to be one of the most meta-impactful characters in the entire 6.x patch cycle, and it looks like that could very well be the case. It seems like she's probably going to be similar to Escoffier overall, and by that I mean Lauma will greatly elevate up many existing teams in DPS, but her strongest team by far will probably end up being a new DPS meant to use her, like where Escoffier had Skirk, that will probably be Nephra for Lauma, which is a bit annoying, but nonetheless, I'm very happy to see so many old teams getting such big buffs. But I'm curious to know your thoughts, so let me know in the comments below. Also feel free to join my Discord where you can communicate with me and my community directly. If you found today's video helpful or enjoyable at all, please be sure to like and subscribe as that helps me out a lot. Thanks, and goodbye.